before starting today's lesson, yesterday at lesson 3 we discussed about protozoan structures and benefit of microorganisms, plus one of the so-called microbes mold. Mold contains hyphae having a lot of nucleus and Y-shaped structured microorganisms. Microorganisms have a lot of significance. As examples, they are used to manufacture food, to manufacture beverage like beer, and used to produce food, and some of them are used as a source of food. And finally, yesterday we discussed about protozoans. They are a unicellular, parasitic and pathogenic with different shape, having nucleus containing eukaryotic organisms. Those are previous class what we have discussed, but today we are going to discuss about the last lesson. It tells about the germ theory of the disease, and the immune systems. At the end, you will have a question about totally the week of the lesson. Then be ready. Let's start from today's lesson. There are objectives. The objective of today's lesson is, by the end of this section, you will be able to explain the discovery of microorganisms, compare and contrast the spontaneous and the non-spontaneous generations, name Robert Koch's postulate, and define what immune system mean. When it comes to the first part of the lesson, the germ theory of the disease. The existence of microorganisms was first discovered in 17th century, in 1723, by a Dutchman, biologist or scholar, so-called Anton van Leeuwenhoek, with the aid of a simple microscope. This Anton van Leeuwenhoek, his work is from 1632 up to 1723, made the first microscope, and he used a small piece of glass and ground them into a magnifying lens, which could magnify 40 up to 270 times. With his lenses, he observed microorganisms in rainwater, seawater, from scraping of the teeth, etc., which included yeasts, protozoa, and bacteria. He called these microorganisms known as animalcules. Animalcules means a teeny, living, moving, unicellular organisms. If you recall back about chapter 2, cell, about animal cell, I have discussed about Anton van Leeuwenhoek, the word animalcules. Then the next biologist known as Robert Koch improved a microscope so that bacteria can be seen. The theory of spontaneous generation is suggested, and also non-spontaneous generation is suggested by different scholars. The germ is a common name for microorganisms that can cause a disease, which in another word, pathogens, disease-causing microorganisms. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch were the first biologists or scholars to establish the germ theory of the disease. There are two perspectives or two views. Most scholars make a debate: spontaneous generation or abiogenesis, and non-spontaneous generation or biogenesis. Spontaneous generations or abiogenesis generation states that life comes from non-life, or life arose from non-life. This is spontaneous or abiogenesis, which means that mainly life is, let's say, made from mud, which is creationist view or God's view, and there are supporters that can support life comes from non-life, Aristotle and John Needham. Those are biologists or scholars that can support or follow spontaneous generation, and also Van Helmont is another scholars that can follow or support spontaneous generation. The second one is the opposite of spontaneous generation, which is called non-spontaneous generation or biogenesis. This generation states that life comes from life, or living things comes from living thing, which is the view of scientific view. Mainly it is scientific view says that life comes from evolutionary lines. Let's say human beings comes from ancestors known as chimpanzee. This means life comes from life. Scientific view. There are supporters. The supporters were Lazarus Spallanzani, Francisco Redi, Louis Pasteur, and Robert Koch. Remember that the supporters of spontaneous generations are the disturbers of non-spontaneous generation. The supporters of non-spontaneous generation is the disturbers of spontaneous generation. They are vice versa. Let's start their work of those biologists. The theory of spontaneous generation or abiogenesis was discovered by those biologists known as Francisco Redi, Lazarus Spallanzani, and so on, and finally well understood that the theory of spontaneous generation is wrong by Louis Pasteur. Francisco Redi in 1668 put meat into jars and left them covered and uncovered. After some days, he observes the two jars. He found the larvae of flies in the uncovered jar and no larvae in the covered jar. He concludes that the larvae come from the egg laid by flies on the rotten milk, which means the egg is laid by adult flies, which is called zygote. John Needham is another biologist from 1713 up to 1781. He put some boiled brose, nutrient brose, which is one of microbial brose, in a tightly closed flask, and when he examines the brose under a microscope at a regular interval, microorganisms appeared. He explained also boiling killed microorganisms and they should have arisen spontaneously. This caused a great controversy with the other scholars. The third one is Lazarus Spallanzani did his own experiment in 1765. He repeated Needham's experiment with some modification. In that experiment, he covered some of the flask and left the other flask uncovered. He found microorganisms in the uncovered. Then he concluded that microorganisms could be formed from spores in the air. Again, the fourth experiment is done by Louis Pasteur from 1822 up to 1895. He is a French scientist, disproved the theory of spontaneous generation. He put boiled brose in the S-shaped flask and found no microorganism in the brose. As the brose cools, air contracts slowly, drawing more air in from outside. However, dust particles in the air were trapped in the curve of the long neck. When the S-shaped flask were broken at the neck so that the liquid came in contact with the trapped dust, many microorganisms appeared in the brose within few days. Finally, the Pasteur's experiment indicates that living things come from pre-existing living things, which means life comes from life, or eukaryotic cells comes from prokaryotic cells. Biologists can call this principle biogenesis. German doctor known as Rudolf Virchow also said omnicellula e cellula in Latin. Omnicellula e cellula means life comes from pre-existing life, or cell comes from another cell. Pasteur finally again identified microorganisms which cause anthrax, rabies, and diphtheria. He also found a weakening or killing of microorganisms by giving vaccine. He showed infectious diseases are caused by microorganisms. Robert Koch is a German doctor, like that of Rudolf Virchow, experimented with infectious disease at the same time as Louis Pasteur. He demonstrated that diseases are caused by certain bacteria. He showed that anthrax is caused by a Bacillus anthracis. This is rod-shaped bacteria. He was the first person to isolate the bacteria that can cause anthrax and tuberculosis. Finally, this Robert Koch put his own formulation as a postulate. There are postulates that can put forward by Robert Koch. Robert Koch developed certain rules which are known as Koch's postulates. These are Pathogens are found in organisms with disease but are absent in healthy individuals. Pathogens could be isolated in pure culture. The third one is the same disease could reproduce in suitable laboratory animals. And the fourth one is pathogens could be reinsulted from artificially infected laboratory animals. So these are four main postulates which are put forwarded by Robert Koch. Finally, Louis Pasteur again showed fermentation reaction are used to make beer and wine as a result of the activity of microorganisms. This is one of the work of Robert Koch, Louis Pasteur, and the work of the experiments of different scholars. Lastly, we discussed in this week about the immune system. The immune system is the system in the body which protects you against invading microorganisms and foreign protein antigens. The resistance of the body against the disease is called immune. The process of producing antibodies against a disease-causing agent by introducing a weakened form of the agents into the body is called immunization or vaccination. The collections of antibody in the body is referred to as immunity, the mass of antibodies. The viral pathogens are dangerous to our body. They are a dangerous leading group, which are all our pathogens, and leading to immediate decline of immune system, and they finally cause fatality. Some of them are HIV and nowadays COVID-19, and so a lot of viral disease. However, still scientists are working to get the drugs, but not yet understood. This is all about this week lesson. If you have any question, welcome. Unless there are questions, in order to assess yourself at the end of this week, give short and precise answer accordingly. Totally there are 8 questions. The first question says, arise the 4 formulations of Robert Koch's postulates, what you have learned in lesson 4. Question number 2, list the biologists who support and disprove both spontaneous or non-spontaneous theory. Again, what we have learned in lesson 4. Third question, how microorganisms enter into the body. This is lesson 1. Question number 4, list at least 5 habitats of microorganisms. This question answer is also from lesson 1. Name the microorganisms which are more pathogenic than the others. I think lesson 4. List down the experimental procedures or methods which are carried out by Francisco Redi, which is also lesson 4. Name the 7th question. Name the known diseases that are identified by Robert Koch due to isolations of specific bacteria. Period 4 question. The last question is, who is the father of bacteriology? This is also a question which is related to last lesson. So this is all about the week lesson with relative questions. Finally, I wanted to conclude the lesson as a reminding post. The reminding post is stay home, stay safe and save lives. Live and let live others. Please follow the medical procedures to fight pandemic disease COVID-19. Be committed, and we hope to see you also. Finally, thank you for your attentive listening and following up. Have a good coming weekend. Bye.